Hello. Very nice to be here. My name is Glenn Siebert, and pianist is Robert Rocco. And we're going to present for you 5 pieces by the Van Vleck family, who are from, I'm sure you already know who they are. But our first one is from C.A. Van Vleck. It's a song called There Is a Hope. And he was the Papa, 1794 to 1845. The second piece we'll do is a piano piece called L'Amitié, and that's by Lisette Maria Van Vleck, 1830 to 1914. And the third piece we'll do is Skylark, and that is a song, and that's by Amelia Adelaide Van Vleck, 1835 to 1929. And our fourth piece is another piano piece. It's called Annie Schottisch, which is a Schottisch dance. And our last piece, and that's by Lisette, and our last piece also by Lisette is called Our Words of Love. And this is really indicative and representative of 19th century popular music, parlor music, but really very finely written, very well crafted.
Hope, more precious and more bright than all the joyless mockery the world esteems delight. There is a star, a lovely star, that lights the darkest gloom and sheds a peaceful radiance o'er the prospects of the tomb. There is a voice, a cheering voice, that lifts the soul above, dispels distrustful, anxious doubt, and whispers God is love. That voice is heard from Calvary's height, and speaks the soul forgiven. That star is revelation's light, that hope, a hope of heaven. blithesome and cumberless, sweet be thy matin o'er moorland and lea. Emblem of happiness, blessed is thy dwelling place. Oh, to abide in the desert with thee. Tra-la-la, 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 Wild is the lay and loud, far in the downy cloud. Love gives its energy, love gave it birth. Whereon thy dewy wing, where art thou journeying? Thy lay is heaven, thy love is on earth. Tra-la-la-la, tra-la-la-la, tra-la-la-la. have sung. And while through life's dreary path we rove, a kindly glance may a solace prove. Though silence be the tongue, though silent be the tongue. Sorrowing hearts anigh, who that sorrows not, that the kind language of the eye, like brighter paintings from the sky, be more the mourner's lot, be more the mourner's lot.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rocco and Dr. Siebert, for that beautiful musical prelude. We appreciate it, and we thank Victoria Remishofsky and also Johnny Pearson and the staff here at Calvary Moravian for hosting us this evening and for helping to plan this program. Thank you so much. Well, good evening, and welcome to the 126th annual meeting of the Wachovia Historical Society. We want to say thank you for joining us in person, via YouTube, and thank you for your dedication through the years by being a member of this revered organization. You are the lifeblood of Wachovia Historical Society, and we appreciate each and every one of you. We would like to call on the Right Reverend Lane Sapp of Calvary Moravian now to come and give our invocation.
Let us pray together. O God of the ages, we are so thankful for your faithfulness to every generation. And as we gather tonight for our annual meeting, we are particularly grateful for the history of this land our forebears founded, sharing faith, promoting education, arts, and industry. May their strong legacy continue to inspire us to work toward greater unity in our day. And may that spirit that works for unity and promotes the common good be upheld among us. And all these things we ask in the name of Christ, who draws us together into community. Amen.
My name is Michelle DeLapp, and I'm privileged to be the temporary leader of this organization. I love these folks who are on the board, and they've been working very hard this year to achieve some interesting and long-awaited projects. Under the direction of Paul Knaus and the Marketing Committee, we are redesigning our website. We hope to have that up by January of this coming year, and we hope you will tune in to see all the new features of our website. And there have been many, many hours put on the design of this website. We have also added additional software to help us with administration. And with Victoria Remishofsky as our chairman of the membership committee, we established a guild this year for those who would like to volunteer their efforts to the society. And the membership committee also established a very fun seasonal raffle, which I'm sure you've been getting emails on. And these raffles are to accomplish smaller but very important projects for the whole of Wachovia tract. And one of these is the Christmas greenery hanging. We're having a current, and I would be probably scolded if I don't say this, our current raffle is running through November the 15th. That's the deadline for ticket sales. And that will be to help hang greenery at Old Salem, which is a very, very important tradition. We certainly miss it when it's not there. So I would encourage you all to go on the website, and if you haven't already, order your tickets. And this is, you will get an opportunity possibly to win a carriage ride through Old Salem. So we are a volunteer board. As you know, we have no staff members. So the funds that we raise go straight to the projects that enrich the experience of the Wachovia tract and fulfill our mission. So if you feel like being a volunteer, come and join us. We'll have some fun. That's what I can guarantee you. So we'd love to have you as part of our volunteer program. Also this year, we renamed the endowment fund that we established at Old Salem Museums and Gardens after our longtime friend and mentor, Robert Arthur Spall. Arthur, as you know, is in a rest home, but he is hopefully tuning in tonight. Arthur worked tirelessly for many years through the restoration of Old Salem and many years on the board of WHS. In Arthur's letter, thank you to us, he wrote these words: "I am humbled and honored by this recognition. Each administration stands on the shoulders of those who have gone before. Many organizations, individuals, foundations, and municipalities have moved the restoration and interpretation programs forward at Old Salem and Mesda. And to all of you, I am grateful." Arthur, if you can hear my voice, we salute you again tonight with this honor. Lastly, we voted as an organization to move forward with the creation of the historic and community park at the Adams Spock Rock House site, just a few miles south of Salem. As you know, this project has been discussed for more than 100 years, and we wanted to fulfill that promise that we made many, many years ago. Through our Properties Committee led by Dr. Ricky Sides, 2 grant applications have been submitted for the first phase of the project, which is an archaeological study. And if our grants are received by the end of the year, we will start that study at the first of 2022. We will move on to execute the master plan phase 2 design of the park when we finish the first phase, and we have the support of the North Carolina Department of Historic Preservation North Carolina, which is a separate entity, and the Davidson County Board of Commissioners, who is going to assist us in putting in walking trails throughout the park. The park will be another green area for family recreation, to honor the memory of the Adams Spock family, and to educate further on the early history of this area and the settlements and the people who came to settle the area. We thank the Properties Committee for their many hours spent on the project so far. The park is not going to happen without a cost. In addition to grants, we will be seeking the help of organizations, private foundations, and individuals who have a connection to and a love of our Moravian heritage. And certainly we'll have regular updates for you on our Facebook and website so you can follow the progress as we go along, and we hope you'll join us in this effort. Now to next year's program of work. Of course, we'll continue the park work. We'll continue the Guild. We are in the process of coordinating history programs through the collaboration with the Tar Heel Junior Historian Clubs that are established through the North Carolina Museum of History in our public schools. We hope to establish a scholarship fund for scholarships to be, or a scholarship to be awarded to an individual who's going to study history or historic preservation, or as a stipend to help an upcoming authored publication. We have designated funds for both the Rock House and the scholarship funds. So if either one of those is your area of interest, you have an opportunity to help support that. Lastly, we have established a long-range planning committee that will be held by, or that will be led by Paula Locklear, who's with us tonight. And she will give direction to our next 5 years of planning, program planning, and planning for growth for Wachovia Historical Society. And I want to thank you for allowing me to come before you and share what we've been doing. And now I would like to call on I.B. Sutherland to give the nominating committee report.
Thank you, Michelle. We bring the name of David Bergstone, who is the Moravian Church Salem Congregation Facilities Manager, which is a big word to say. This name was presented to our board in September, and in the absence of members at our annual meeting was approved by the board. We also elected officers for the 2022 year: Michelle DeLapp, President; Jimmy Snyder, Vice President; Victoria Rimakowski, Secretary; and Carl Capp, Treasurer. I'd also like at this time to thank Mr. Johnny Pearson for his dedicated service for the 8 years of service to our society board. So he served as chairman of the annual meeting and the Archie K. Davis Award Committee, which is a very important part of the annual meeting. And Johnny, thank you.
Good evening. I'm Paula Locklear, a member of the board of the Wachovia Historical Society, and it is my very distinct pleasure to introduce Johanna Metzger-Brown, our speaker for tonight. And as Michelle said, this is the 126th annual meeting for the Wachovia Historical Society, so it's a fairly auspicious thing. Johanna is the curator of Moravian Decorative Arts and director of collections at Old Salem Museums and Gardens. She has a BA in American Studies and Anthropology from Salem College and an MA in History Museum Studies from the Cooperstown Graduate Program in Cooperstown, New York. In 1991, after completing her MA, Johanna began working at Old Salem 30 years ago, congratulations, where she has served in various collections management and curatorial positions. For 27 of those years, Johanna and I worked closely together at Old Salem. Although she focuses most of her research on the Moravian Decorative Arts, the collections at Old Salem and the Wachovia Historical Society, she also works with the collections of the Museum of Early Southern Decorative Arts. Johanna has written extensively for a variety of notable publications, including Ceramics in America, the Journal of Early Southern Decorative Arts, the magazine Antiques, and Antiques and Fine Art. Her deep and extensive knowledge of Moravian decorative arts and material culture has also made her an invaluable part of the Old Salem exhibit teams, most recently for the Diane Furr Moravian Decorative Arts Gallery in the Frank L. Horton Museum Center at Old Salem, the Moravian Way of Health and Healing exhibit in the Doctor's House, and for the reimagining of the 1794 Salem Boys School as a learning hub on the Salem Square. Johanna lectures regularly on Moravian and Southern history, and material culture, and it's in this capacity that we welcome her here tonight. Because this is the 250th anniversary year for Salem Academy and College, and since Johanna is an alumna of Salem College and an advisor to the Wachovia Historical Society Board, it seemed very appropriate for her to combine her Old Salem, Salem College, and Wachovia Historical Society affiliations to highlight all three institutions. Her talk is entitled, "A Place of Peace and a Dwelling of Blessing, the Early History of the Salem Girls Boarding School in Commemoration of the 250th Anniversary of the Founding of Salem Academy and College." I know that we are all in for a treat, and so without further ado, I will turn the podium over to my good friend and former colleague, Johanna Brown.
Thank you, Paula, for that very nice introduction. I'm actually going to speak from the little table over here, and anytime you want to go ahead and get the slides ready, we're ready to do that. Well, as Paula said just now, the 21-22. As Paula said, the 21-22 academic year marks the 250th anniversary of the founding of Salem Academy and College. This year marks not only the celebration of the school's past, but an opportunity to recognize contributions of the girls and women who will contribute to its future. Thank you to the Wachovia Historical Society for giving me the opportunity to talk about the early foundation upon which that future rests. Most of you are familiar with the theocratic Moravians who came to America from Herrnhut, Germany in the 18th century and established their first successful congregation communities in Pennsylvania before coming to North Carolina, where they settled on land they named Wachovia in Piedmont, North Carolina. I'm not going to spell out the details of that because we don't want to be here all night. Usually, when I begin a talk about the Moravians, I use the words of 18th and 19th century travelers to introduce the North Carolina Moravians to my listeners. The vast majority of surviving travel journals that talk about visits to Salem were written by men. For this lecture, in which I will share and celebrate the early history and material culture of the Salem Girls Boarding School, I'm pleased that we can frame the lecture with the words of a female traveler. 23-year-old Juliana Margaret Connor, a woman from Charleston, South Carolina, visited the Moravian town of Salem on her trip through the Southeast in 1827. Though she was newly married and traveled with her husband, she is the one who recorded her impressions of Salem. In describing Salem, Juliana wrote, "This town is altogether composed of Moravian society, where all property is common. A leader of the community politely called after dinner to show us everything worthy of notice in the place. We walked through several of the streets. The buildings are remarkably neat. There are pretty gardens and paved streets. Everything is in the singular number. One church, one public house, one store of each trade, etc., etc. Being Saturday, there was no school. We therefore did not visit the buildings, but deferred it until Monday. They make it a part of their business to show a stranger everything worthy of note at the place, which is certainly not only polite, but kind. Sunday, in the morning at 9 o'clock, Mr. Baggy called to conduct us to the church, which is a very neat and commodious building. There are separate entrances for the males and females, and they sit on opposite sides of the building. The appearance of the pupils of the academy as you enter presents a highly interesting sight and cannot fail to excite admiration. They all wear pretty lace caps. They were attended by their, and this word always gets me, preceptresses, in other words, their teachers, who were dressed in like manner. None of the inhabitants wear bonnets, simply a cap. The prayers were according to the form of the German Lutheran. There was considerable chanting, the effect of which was heightened and improved by the aid of a very fine organ, played with solemnity and taste. When we were concluded, the pupils left the church in the order in which they entered and proceeded to the schoolhouse. The congregation was dismissed. In about half an hour, we went to the chapel, which is a large room in the academy fitted for that purpose, where there was to be a sermon in English delivered for the pupils. The organ was played by Miss Steiner, who is the first preceptress. The children are 150 in number, not including those who belong to the place, or the Moravian girls, and they behave with the most perfect propriety. Not a whisper was heard or a smile seen. Their example would be worthy of the imitation of many a congregation of a larger growth. We retraced our steps with feelings highly gratified by the interesting spectacle we had witnessed. Almost a profound stillness reigns today. So much order and such a general air of neatness I have never seen. On Monday, after an early dinner, we visited the academy again. We were conducted regularly to the several rooms appropriated to the different classes. This period of the day was devoted to music and needlework, and we examined and admired the beautiful embroidery, beadwork, etc., which was to be preserved and shown as specimens of taste and industry, with feelings, I doubt not, of pride by both parent and child. We passed to the music room, where one of the tutoresses favored us with Home Sweet Home with variations. In every room there is a piano at which a lady presides to instruct, whilst the others are employed with the needle. There is in this institution a daughter of one of the Cherokee chiefs, Ridge. She was pointed out to me, and I vainly endeavored to catch her eye and the expression of her countenance. But she manifested not the slightest degree of curiosity at the entree of so many strangers, never raised her head from the garment at which she was busily employed, presenting a strong contrast to the gazing looks of those by whom she was surrounded. Now I'm just going to stop Juliana's words for just a minute and explain that Chief Ridge had sent his daughter to Salem and contracted with Salem painter Daniel Welfare to have his daughter Sally's portrait painted. In the reminiscences of Eliza Vierling Kremer, who was a teacher during Sally's time, Eliza wrote, Mr. Daniel Welfare painted portraits, and the Indian girl's father gave an order for one of his daughter, and I had to go with her to his gallery for the sittings. Although its current whereabouts is unknown, the portrait was photographed before it was lost. And if anybody knows where it is, I'll be happy to share my cell phone number with you, because Old Salem would be delighted to provide a safe home for it. Indeed, several Cherokee girls attended Salem before the devastation of the Trail of Tears tragically ended their opportunities. But back to Juliana's words. I was much pleased with the general appearance of content and happiness which beamed in the countenances of all the pupils. Their instructresses, I don't know why she just couldn't say teachers, their instructresses treat them with maternal kindness and are rewarded by their warm attachment. Punishment is unknown. Reasoning and persuasion are the only means employed to correct and convince. The adjoining building is the sister's house, where perfect order and neatness reigns. Indeed, that may be said of the whole town. They live in a world and are governed by laws of their own creation, independent of and distinct from all other society, and their views extend but beyond the hill which forms their natural boundary. But in kindness and politeness, they are not excelled. I'm sharing with you an abridged version of Juliana's description of Salem. Again, we don't want to be here all night, but it's striking to me how much of her description of the town is actually focused on her impressions of the academy and its students. By the time she visited, nearly a quarter of a century after its founding, the school was well known and revered as one of the best schools for girls in the South, at a time when options for female education were limited. I think it's safe to say that the academy and its success was a point of pride for the town and one of the things for which the Moravians had become known throughout the South. Nearly every visitor after the opening of the Salem Girls Boarding School commented on the school. Although there were many things that differentiated the Moravians from their neighbors, one of the distinct characteristics of Moravian communities was the role of women in those towns. Of course, Moravian women had many of the same responsibilities that their 18th and 19th century counterparts had: housekeeping, the care of children and other family members, gardening, food preparation, making clothing, and other textile management jobs. But the structure of the congregation town meant that there were also profound differences. Since they were intricately involved in the management of the secular and religious life of their own choir and expected to support themselves and contribute to the choir, as single sisters, the young women of the community learned managerial skills and were given positions of authority and freedoms to make decisions about their own lives, not widely known by their counterparts outside of the Moravian Church. Furthermore, from very early on, the members of the Unity believed in the importance of education for girls and for boys. It's not surprising, therefore, that shortly after the central town of Salem was established in North Carolina, many of the families and tradespeople relocated from the first Moravian community in North Carolina, Bethabara, to the new congregation town. Community leaders began to lobby for a school for their young daughters. Salem's School for Girls, which commenced in 1772, was a bit of an anomaly in the 18th century North Carolina backcountry. Educational institutions for girls in the South were few. Elizabeth Ersteline, a member of the newly settled Single Sisters Choir, was chosen as the teacher, and the little school was begun in a room of the Gemein House where the Single Sisters had lived prior to the building of their own house. It could not have been much more than a daycare, really. Her first pupils were 2.5, 4.5, and 8. The records note that Sister Ersteline taught reading, sewing, and other skills, but did not teach arithmetic because she didn't know any. Now, I would argue that anybody who can sew or knit probably knows a little arithmetic, maybe not in a formal way. The hours were determined by the parents, so her teaching schedule was quite erratic. The sisters were charged for the use of 4 rooms in the Gemein House and given credit for the one used as a schoolroom, which I see as yet another bit of evidence of the importance the Moravians placed on education. Of course, it didn't take long for word to spread that the Moravians had commenced a school for girls and for outsiders to begin asking if they could send their daughters to Salem to be educated. The Moravians were no strangers to operating boarding schools for girls. The Moravian seminaries for girls in Bethlehem and Lidditz were well known as exceptional boarding schools for Moravians and non-Moravians alike, and Salem's leaders did consider the possibility. After all, they saw not only the profitability of such ventures, but also the opportunity to proselytize. The schools were considered missions of sorts. But in the 18th century, the leadership of Salem did not feel as though they had an adequate workforce for a large boarding school. After praying about the possibility of commencing a boarding school and consulting the lot, they noted in the records, quote, "On the advice of the Lord, we laid aside such plans for this time." Moravian students did come from surrounding Moravian communities, however, to attend the school. Such was the case for Anna Maria Samuel, an African-American child born into slavery in Bethabara in 1781 and baptized into the Moravian Church. If educating girls was unusual in the 18th and 19th century, offering an education to an African-American child of either sex was truly exceptional. But in the 18th century, baptism and membership in the Moravian Church secured certain privileges for the people enslaved by the Moravians despite their bondage. There wasn't a school for older girls in Bethabara where Anna Maria lived with her family. So in 1793, she joined the older girls' choir in Salem and in all of the activities of the other girls her age, which included school classes. Anna Maria was apparently following in the footsteps of, quote, "a little Negro girl," end of quote, of Adam Schumacher, whose name may have been Hannah. In 1785, the Salem Diary noted, quote, "Adam Schumacher asks that his Negro girl, about 10 years old, may be received into the school, for which permission is given." Adam Schumacher actually lived just outside of Salem, so he was allowed to enslave people himself. Finally, in 1802, with the arrival of Sister Dorothea Reichel from Bethlehem, whose father had been called to Salem to serve as pastor of the congregation, the school had a teacher well trained in a larger variety of subjects, and one who could tutor other single sisters so the whole of the teaching staff could be more effective. Sister Reichel arrived with the skills to teach reading, writing, grammar, history, geography, plain sewing, knitting, music, fine needlework, and drawing. Her skills gave the church leadership much more confidence about the possibility of operating a boarding school in Salem. Even God apparently was impressed with this change of circumstances, as within a short time of Sister Reichel's arrival, the lot indicated that the Lord approved of a boarding school, which would include non-Moravian students, and Samuel Gottlieb Crumpsch was called to serve as the first head of the school. So, recognizing the opportunity to both spread the Word of God and profit from doing so, the Salem Church Board voted to establish such a school. In 1804, the Salem Girls Boarding School accepted its first non-Moravian students. Single sisters served as teachers, and the curriculum of the girls' boarding school was rigorous. Academic subjects to be taken by every student included writing, arithmetic, grammar, history, and geography. Instruction in plain sewing and knitting were also included in the tuition paid for each student. And for an added fee, students could add ornamental branches such as painting, drawing, music, and fine needlework to their course of study. Accomplishments in the ornamental branches was considered important evidence of a young girl's civility, gentility, and, quote, taste and industry in the world in which the Salem Girls Boarding School was founded. In fact, shortly after the site of the school building was staked out, the congregation held a service to celebrate the founding of the school, in which Pastor Reichel spoke of the opportunity given to the brethren to educate even those who were not members of the unity about the great virtues of the Lord. He talked of the boarding school as a place where children might be, quote, brought up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord and may be instructed in useful knowledge and learning and the womanly arts. Although a lecture about the academic pursuits of the early pupils attending the girls' boarding school would reveal how truly diverse and comprehensive their education was beyond the womanly arts, we'll now focus on their artistic pursuits, if only because images of needlework, beadwork, and watercolor painting are much more fun to look at than slides of the texts they read, the arithmetic problems they solved, and the writing exercises on which they excelled. That the womanly arts of needlework were considered an important part of the curriculum for nurturing these students from the beginning is borne out in early inventories of the school. An 1805 inventory lists, quote, fine London silk, gold cord, and silver spangles. Although this little pocketbook was not made until 1838, it is adorned with silk thread and silver spangles or sequins. It's a complicated little piece complete with notepaper, a mirror, and a red woolen leaf for the storage of needles. The inventory of the articles and things belonging to the boarding school at Salem, April 30th, 1806, lists 12 yards fine canvas for samplers and 1.5 yards coarse ditto. Also included in the inventory were fine white canvas, skeins of sewing silk, sewing needles, and embroidery needles. Among the furnishings brought for the new school building were 12 embroidery frames, probably similar to the ones in this image. 12 stands and 12 seats were also included from Salem's master joiner at the time, Van Nieman Zevely. Even before the completion of the new school building, which opened in 1805, an 1804 account shows payment for, quote, patterns of Bernard. This was probably a payment to Andrew Bernard, who'd been appointed the principal of the Young Ladies' Seminary in Bethlehem in 1799. He went on to become the pastor and head of Lititz Seminary before moving to Salem in 1822, where he lived until 1828. We can imagine that Bernard supplied not only materials such as needlework patterns, but also advice to Crumpsch on the operation of a Moravian girls' seminary. Orphan Peggy Allison, whose sampler you see here, and her sister Adeline were brought to the Salem Girls Boarding School from the York District of South Carolina in June of 1808 by their guardian, William Smith. On April 9, 1809, in a letter to William Smith from the Inspector Steiner reveals, quote, both the Allisons make progress, Peggy more with work of hand than with study of head. And indeed, if we look at Peggy's sampler, we see that she got a little distracted and included two M's, one before and one after the N, in the second alphabet at the top of the piece. Peggy included several motifs commonly seen on Salem samplers, including a central wreath with her name and the date that she probably completed the sampler, an oak tree, and a well, in addition to other motifs commonly found on German needlework patterns. The well motif is surely the most overtly religious symbol that many girls incorporated into their samplers, and is perhaps intentionally one of the largest and most prominent on Peggy's sampler. The object of the well and its product, water, figure heavily into biblical teachings with which the students at the school would have been familiar. Of course, we're all familiar with the story from the Gospel of John of Christ preaching the gospel to the Samaritan woman at the well who left her water pot, in other words, dropped everything, to then go spread the gospel among the townspeople. It's tempting to speculate that this symbol and this story had special significance to the female teachers at the school, whose mission was to teach, and possibly convert, impressionable young women and girls about the Savior and his gift of everlasting life. The story of the woman at the well is one of witness by a woman, the very thing the young teachers were called to do through their teaching at the school. Now, I'm not saying the single sisters were charter members of the National Organization of Women or were burning their corsets in the town square. But I can't help but wonder of the larger influence these Moravian women as teachers had on their young charges, who saw a choir and a school essentially organized and run by women. Yes, the headmaster was a man, who worked with his wife incidentally, but the teachers were all young women and single sisters. The single sisters' house itself was run by women, provided for the school in many ways, and was the location of other trades practiced by the women who supported themselves. The education and communal living provided by the choir system may well have given the sisters a confidence and independent spirit not widely available to their contemporaries. It's hard to imagine that the girls in the boarding school would not have noticed the role the single sisters played in governing themselves and as caretakers of their own spiritual health within the wider church community. But back to the students. Although Peggy Allison's sampler is a good example of the typical organization of samplers in the Salem tradition, this example by another little girl named Peggy, Peggy Andrews from Hertford County in North Carolina, is less typical. Peggy Andrews does not include an alphabet at all on her sampler and surrounds the motifs and initials she has chosen with a wide floral border that we don't see on very many samplers from the school. Peggy does include a wreath in the center of the sampler with her initials and those of her parents along with the date she made it. But while many girls who made samplers at Salem stitched the initials of their family members across the tops of their sampler, Peggy has stitched the initials of each of the teachers working at the school in 1806 when she was in attendance. As an only child and an orphan, clearly, Peggy felt a familial affinity toward these women who were not only her teachers, but no doubt a source of personal guidance and nurturing. Throughout the 19th century, the Salem Girls Boarding School had an excellent reputation throughout the South. Many parents of girls sent to Salem frequently reminded their daughters of how very fortunate they were to have the opportunity to attend such a prestigious school. At least one student was not quite convinced of her good fortune, however. Frustrated by her family's efforts to assure her how lucky she was to be attending an educational institution with Salem's reputation, a student from Mill Hill, North Carolina, Ann Steyerwalt, wrote home to her mother in 1837, declaring that, quote, "I went down to dinner, and what do you think I had? Ham that was as fat as lard itself and bread black as ink, which had a worm 2 inches long. I am very nearly perished for something to eat." Now, I know school food has never been that good, but I also have raised teenagers, and I know that they're prone to exaggeration, so I'll bet that worm was only about half an inch long. As students' talents with the needle progressed, they might embark on a more complicated silk-on-silk piece, such as this mourning embroidery, stitched by Minerva Hurd in honor of her father. Minerva was born in 1806 in Morgan County, Georgia. By the time she enrolled at Salem, her family had moved to Tennessee. Minerva has used chenille and silk ribbon along with silk floss to create this multi-dimensional tribute to her father, who sadly died shortly after the young girl arrived at Salem. The most elaborate silk-on-silk pictorial embroidery known to survive from the girls' boarding school is this image of Mount Vernon, stitched by Mary Ann Speed while she was a student between 1810 and 1812. An orphan by the age of 13, Mary Ann was sent to Salem from Mecklenburg County, Virginia, by her cousin and guardian, attorney Richard Apperson. In a letter to her guardian in 1811, Inspector Steiner wrote Apperson that Mary Ann was, quote, advanced in grammar, geography, drawing, needlework, and other female accomplishments. The 1806 inventory of the embroidery materials of the school lists pictures, drawings, and engravings. Given the location of these materials in the embroidery room, they were probably used as patterns for pictorial pieces such as the one completed by Mary Ann. After the death of George Washington in 1799, the young Republic of America went into mourning for the much-beloved political leader. Mount Vernon became a popular destination for travelers and a popular print subject. Mary Ann may have been inspired by any number of prints of the mansion. The accounting of Mary Ann's expenses between June of 1811 and January of 1812 records her purchase of the variety of materials she would have needed to complete the needlework, including a total of 81 skeins of embroidery silk, 41.5 yards of silk chenille, ribbons, tape, and satin. Perhaps the frame with glass she purchased for $1.50 on January 3, 1812, was meant for this particular needlework specimen. As much as I adore Mary Speed's Mount Vernon and love that we can find out so much about her from existing records, I'm equally enchanted by this anonymous little boy who has apparently been out for a romp with his dog. Notice the similarities between this needlework and this little watercolor of a little boy named Joseph at play. This little watercolor, or actually the woodcut that was eventually made from it, may have been the inspiration for the needlework that you see here. The composition of this piece, with the central scene enclosed in an oval wreath made of ribbon and crepe flowers, is typical of pictorial needlework pictures from Salem in the 1820s and 30s, like this one completed by Elizabeth Cloyd about 1830. Elizabeth was from Montgomery County, Virginia, and attended Salem between 1828 and 1830. She and other students, like the maker of the little boy, may have been inspired by little woodcut illustrations like the one I just mentioned. You can see how similar her composition is to this little woodcut published by Benjamin Bramwell, who was a printer and colorist in Philadelphia. While at times teachers painted the watercolor portions of the girls' needlework, by the 1820s, the girls attending Salem may have requested the help of the professional painter in town, Daniel Welfare, who could complete their needlework pictures by adding the faces, hands, and backgrounds in oils, as he probably did for the maker of the little boy, Elizabeth Cloyd, and Matilda Winkler, a little Moravian girl who completed this elaborate mourning piece for her brother in 1826. You can see how similar the faces on the needleworks are to the other works by Welfare, such as this portrait of Peter Woolley's children painted about 1828. Despite occasional meal malfunctions, I think you can see why Salem's reputation was excellent and the school attracted students from all over the backcountry South. For example, a young Sarah Childress left her home in Murfreesboro, Tennessee to attend Salem in 1817, in spite of the fact that the Nashville Female Academy had just opened a year before. Supporters of the Nashville Female Academy were not pleased that many of the young ladies in Tennessee seeking an education were attracted to Salem's sterling reputation. The frustration prompted one devotee of the Nashville school to write a scathing 3-column denigration in the Nashville Whig of Salem, in which the writer alleged that the town of Salem had no society, and therefore the school could only teach German manners, not the proper English manners so desired by the parents of young women. Of course, the writer proclaims the Nashville Female Academy offered the perfect polite education for the young women of Tennessee, and it warned parents of Salem students, quote, "Although you may in time destroy the effects of the sauerkraut on your daughters by the washes of modern times, I incline to the opinion that you will see its marks in the latest period of their lives." Now, you may recall that the young Sarah Childress, who made this particular piece while she was at Salem, married James K. Polk in 1825, becoming the 11th First Lady of the United States in 1845. I don't know, but it seems like she might have learned something pretty useful while she was at Salem. While a student at Salem, as I said, Miss Childress completed this mourning embroidery. It may have been a tribute to her sister Elizabeth, who died as a toddler in 1814 before she and her sister came to Salem. Sarah used several symbols that are evocative of mourning and death, such as the monument in the center, as well as willows and evergreens. She used many of the materials to execute her fine needlework, such as satins, silk, the satin ground, chenille, and silk embroidery thread that other students used, but unfortunately, her actual student records are not to be found. However, the records that record the expenses her father paid for her to attend Salem do still exist. As needlework fashions changed, the teachers at Salem kept up with the newest trends and offered students the opportunity to learn to incorporate newly fashionable materials and to learn new techniques. An 1836 letter to Brother Jacobson, then inspector or headmaster of the school, from a Boston merchant from whom Jacobson hoped to procure supplies for the school, illustrates some of the other materials the girls were using in their work further into the 19th century, and puts what Salem girls were doing in context with what others were doing other places at the time. The merchant writes, "Dear Sir, a letter from you requesting us to inform you if we sell English and German worsteds is at hand. I do deal quite largely in many articles of the kind used in embroidery. The English worsted we always have a large quantity on hand, as well as the fine German or ladies' zephyr, which is examples are pictured here. That's also a worsted thread to use. The chenille cords are an article never inquired for, or at least very seldom, and we have none of them on hand. The marking silk is another article never asked for, and we have not. Patterns for worsted work and etc. we always have on hand and sell them at as low a price as anyone as we import them ourselves. The reason why we have not the other articles is that they're not used here. Frequently, the work most done in one place is not known in another. At one time, the rage is for beads, at another for embroidery, at another worsted work. In Philadelphia, animals and birds are almost the only designs for working in worsted, while with us in Boston, it is impossible to see anything but flower pieces. And here we have some patterns, Berlin work patterns, that the students used at Salem. While this letter suggests that the chenille and silk Salem students used to create the elaborate needlework pictures like the ones we've looked at had gone out of fashion in Boston, the rage for Berlin work embraced by Salem students and teachers, evidenced by the wide variety of extant patterns and examples, was clearly fully embraced. From a piano stool made by Julia Amelia Conrad, a Moravian student from Bethania, to shoes. This is the piano stool, and this shows the pattern that actually still is in the collection of patterns from Salem that matches exactly her stool. They also made shoes and tops to boxes, as well as things like belts. The full variety of Berlin work projects was endless, and the brilliantly hand-colored little patterns are artworks in themselves. Although the school purchased the Berlin work patterns already painted, from the earliest days of the school's operation, watercolor painting was yet another form of artistic expression that the young students at Salem were encouraged to master. They seemed to concentrate their efforts on painting delicate floral sprays like the ones you see on the right. The students used their watercolor skills to decorate autograph entries for their friends in autograph books and to make trinkets and gifts like the little pocket you see on the right. Surviving evidence suggests that just as the students used the needle skills they acquired while at Salem for the rest of their lives, their painting skills too gave them something to create and decorate objects of adornment and decoration for themselves and as gifts to others. It's difficult to quantify the lasting impact that the Salem Girls Boarding School had on its young female students. Moravians and non-Moravians alike thought very highly of the school throughout, well, even today, continue to think so. I think the story of Sarah Childress Polk, while as an extreme example, is a good one to think about. The education Sarah received at Salem was apparently a good one, and was no doubt a credit to her in her role as First Lady. In fact, Sarah Childress Polk is the first First Lady who had a formal education, and much of it she received at Salem. As her biographers have recounted, Sarah Polk acted as an advisor to her husband throughout his political career, served as his secretary during his presidency and beyond, and was admired for her intelligence, political acumen, and poise. Sarah, just like other alumni, maintained fond memories of her days at Salem for the rest of her life. When the school sent her a package with copies of its newsletters in the late 19th century, she responded with a letter to Emma Lehman, the longtime teacher at the school who had sent her the package, saying, "Please accept my sincere acknowledgments for the number of the Academy so kindly sent to me. It's particularly interesting and acceptable as everything relating to my old and always revered and beloved alma mater attracts my attention and regard." There are probably no more than one or two living now who shared with me those bright and fleeting hours. Miss Louisa Krampsch, afterwards Blickensdorfer, was one of my teachers, ever since gratefully remembered. Louisa Krampsch Blickensdorfer was the maker of this watercolor and died in 1880, just a few short years before Sarah received her package. In 1805, when the Salem Girls Boarding School building was ready for occupation, Inspector Brother Reichel dedicated the building to the Lord as a place of peace and a dwelling of blessing. As Salem Academy and College celebrates its 250th anniversary, I think of all of the girls and women who have found peace at Salem and been blessed by the educational opportunities and friendships that have dwelt with them there. And I'm proud of all that these women have accomplished, and I marvel at what the next 250 years may bring. Thank you.
Mr. Martin, if you'll please change the projector. Thank you.
Well, we follow Joanna's excellent and colorful presentation about this important presence in Salem and Wachovia, and we thoroughly enjoyed that. It is a great honor for us to introduce this year's Archie K. Davis Award for contributions to the knowledge and appreciation of Moravian history. Let's begin.
Herrenhout has the Moravian Star Factory, and we have Mrs. Haynes Moravian Cookies. What great evangelism.
The hands behind Mrs. Haynes' handmade Moravian cookies are the founders, Eva and Travis Haynes. For over 60 years, this power couple has made a significant contribution to the knowledge and appreciation of Moravian history through the deep sensory experience of their handmade Moravian cookies.
Mrs. Haynes cookies are Moravian ambassadors like no other. sending Moravian history across the globe by the paper-thin millions. Eva and Travis's lifetime has been devoted to building an important and successful local business with broad outreach based on Moravian history and tradition.
Eva and Travis Haynes are deeply rooted in Wachovia through their Moravian ancestry and are active members of Friedberg Moravian Church. Both descend from Adam and Maria Spock, founders of Friedberg. The cookie factory is located on Eva's family farmland along Friedberg Church Road, just south of the Adam Spock Rock House site, the significant property of the Wachovia Historical Society.
Mrs. Haynes Cookies is a family business that grew out of Eva's mother's Christmas time enterprise of supplementing income from their small dairy farm with Moravian cookies. Her mother, Bertha Crouch Foltz, baked old family recipe Moravian cookies with Eva by her side. In 1960, Eva took over all the baking when her mother's health failed. The business grew by word of mouth, and the first bakery building was constructed in 1970.
Travis and Eva have overseen 7 expansions, and the cookie factory is now more than 30,000 square feet of manufacturing, warehouse, and office space. A large parking area for customers is outside. Annual production at Mrs. Haynes Cookies is approximately 10 million cookies, each carrying the Moravian story. Sales include retail at the cookie factory and mail order to 90,000 customers in all 50 states and 30 countries abroad.
The cookie factory bakes year-round, and Mrs. Haynes Cookies are the only Moravian cookies to be completely produced by hand.
The retail area of the cookie factory includes photographs, newspaper and magazine stories, various artifacts, and items of interest. Travis Haynes' signature walking sticks are handcrafted works of art. The retail area also features the production process. Large plate glass walls line the room and provide viewing for each step of cookie making.
The production process is mesmerizing as the artists in aprons deftly roll out the dough into paper thinness on their custom-built angled rolling boards. In flashing speed, they cut the dough with 10 cookie cutters and lay each cookie out precisely onto cookie sheets.
The cookie sheets go into large ovens at the back of the room, and the pans emerge with perfectly baked Moravian cookies. They cool and are then packed into tins and tubes, all by careful hands.
Mrs. Haynes Cookie Factory is a significant employer of women in the Forsyth-Davidson County area. Eva is a 7th-generation Moravian cookie maker and has trained all to the art of the Moravian cookie tradition.
Mrs. Haynes' Moravian Cookie Factory is also a unique tourist destination for locals, visitors, and travel and food writers. Visits are so popular that scheduled tours are available to school groups and community organizations.
In the Moravian tradition, Mrs. Haynes' Handmade Moravian Cookies is a family business built on excellence of quality and customer service. Eva and Travis's children, Mona Haynes Templin and Mike Haynes, have followed their parents in the management of Mrs. Haynes Cookies, with the next generation coming along.
Eva and Travis continue to live in their home up the hill from the cookie factory and provide the support and wisdom of their experience. They also regularly host family and friends for home-cooked meals.
The website is full of information, and the annual catalog is anticipated in the mail every fall. Mrs. Haynes' marketing includes a personal letter from Eva, a history of the Moravians, and the history of the family business in the Friedberg community.
Eva and Travis Haynes are committed to quality in every way. Their goal remains to be, quote, the best cookie makers in the world, unquote. With their delicious and memorable product, they put North Carolina on the map in a positive, relevant way. Ms. Haynes Cookies is also an economic driver for tourism and highlights the Visit Winston-Salem, quote, Moravian Cookie Trail, unquote. We're so very fortunate that they are part of the Moravian story in North Carolina.
As a matter of fact, the 2019 North Carolina General Assembly passed legislation making the Moravian cookie the state cookie of North Carolina. In part, the bill said, quote, "It is fitting to recognize the positive impact the Moravians have had on the state's culture," end quote. And it also cited the heritage of the Moravian community and the cookies, as well as the economic and tourism impact of Moravian cookie sales in the Winston-Salem area since the 1950s.
Like Mr. Archie K. Davis, Eva and Travis Haynes, quote, contribution and devotion to the history of our region, state, and nation has enriched the appreciation of our heritage, unquote, through their lifetime devotion to Moravian culinary history and tradition.
And now, the Wachovia Historical Society honors Eva and Travis Haynes with this year's Archie K. Davis Award.
Congratulations.
And please come forward.
Michelle, would you come and make the presentation?
Will you welcome
Eva
forward?
and Travis,
Welcome
please
forward.
come. That's beautiful.
Eva and Travis, we take great pride in delivering to you this special award, and congratulations for a well-deserved award.
Beautiful.
Beautiful Moravian plate.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
You all want to make some comments, step right up there.
Oh, dear. Oh, I'd like to thank you very much. We are missionaries with cookies, I guess, because we've let thousands and thousands of people through the United States and all over the world tell about the Moravian Church, because when we send out a brochure, it also has the history of the Moravian Church. And as I said, I was a Moravian born, Moravian bred, and when I'm dead, I'll be a Moravian dead. But my family has been very active in the Moravian Church my entire life, and I have too. And I love the Moravian Church and what it stands for. And so, Travis, would you have something to say?
Just a word or two. This is very special to us
Very.
because having known Mr. Archie Davis and Ms.
Yes.
Davis, they not only were customers, they were friends. And I'll have to add this one bit of thing. We're in the mail order business. Mr. Archie Davis was instrumental in getting us our first start in the mail order business. We were doing a little mail order, but he got his friend, Dr. William Friday, to come up and do a field production at our home and bakery, and this was actually the biggest boost we could get in starting out in the mail order business, and we're very grateful.
And I will say they were strictly a gentleman and a lady. I love them both.
Stay up here. We'll get a picture of you in a minute.
Okay.
Again, we thank you for coming out tonight, and we are looking forward to seeing you all back in person next year. But have a good evening. Thank you so much.
And I'd like to say, too, our children have supported us all through these years, and they're all 4 here tonight.